Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
8:07 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. It's Mornings on the Mall with Brian and Larry. And joining us now on the Newsmaker Hotline from the great state of Utah, Senator Mike Lee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Welcome back to town.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be with you.
Senator Lee, I know that you've got a lot going on, and there's a whole bunch on the agenda, and not least of which, apparently now you're going to be putting a budget together. According to Senator Chuck Schumer, that was always the plan. I'm sure that's news to you. I'm interested, what do you think of the House's proposition that they are going to extend the debt limit by 3 months at a time now and make it condition-based? This first condition is that your august body needs to pass a budget finally.
Well, the first thing we have to remember is that it's been almost 4 years since the Senate has passed a budget. That's inexcusable. I mean, the last time the Senate passed a budget, no one had ever heard of a device known as the iPad.
Oh, my.
So we desperately need a budget, and it's important that we get one passed. So anything that can move us in that direction is definitely worth considering. Now, I haven't seen the legislative text of what the House is considering, but I'll have a look at it.
But in the big picture, from your perspective, what do you think should be done about the debt ceiling?
Okay, so in the big picture, when we approach the debt ceiling, as we've got $16 trillion in debt, we're adding to that at the rate of about $1 trillion a year. I think what we need is something that amounts to permanent structural spending reform, something that permanently changes the way Washington spends money and more importantly, borrows money. So the problem isn't so much the debt ceiling itself as it is the spending that propels the debt ceiling and forces us to revisit it and raise it every 12 to 18 months. And so that's why we need spending reform. The best way of achieving permanent structural spending reform is through a balanced budget amendment.
All right, but in the House has an idea that says, look, if you guys in the Senate can't come up with a budget, then Congress is not going to be paid. Are you down with that?
Well, it's certainly a way of spurring us into action. I haven't seen exactly how they've written it yet,
right.
But it's an idea worth considering.
All right, I want to ask you about another thing that's happening in the Senate. We're going to get to Benghazi in a moment, but I want to ask you about the fact that Reid, the majority leader of the Senate, is talking about imposing something that's been called the nuclear option to change the rules regarding filibuster. And as I sort of read it, it sort of turns the Senate into another version of the House and makes filibusters a lot less likely and a lot less of a threat to the legislative process. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it would be unfortunate, first of all, for us to break the rules of the Senate in order to change the rules. Mm-hmm. And the nuclear option might well involve a threat to the rules themselves.
Well, what would be the reaction of Republicans if he does that?
Well, we would be very unhappy, to say the least. This is not a move toward mutual respect, compromise, and an open legislative process. And we have to remember that the reason the Senate rules operate the way they do is that the Senate touts itself as the world's greatest deliberative legislative body, where supposedly we're entitled to an open-ended amendment process and extended debate, potentially unlimited debate. So that we can make sure that we've considered all the angles of each piece of legislation that comes up. And so this would be a move in the opposite direction. This would take us away from that, and I think that would be a real loss to the Senate as an institution, not just to Republicans.
Benghazi, the Secretary of State's going to testify today on Benghazi. You're a former member of the Foreign Relations Committee. What kind of questions would you have were you in that room today?
Well, I would want to know what the administration knew and when it knew it. I'd want to know why it was that the questions that we asked Secretary Clinton the last time she testified in front of the Senate on Benghazi a few months ago, why we got so little information in response. And I'd want to know the precise timing of the administration's awareness of various developments that occurred in Benghazi.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah is our guest, and you mentioned a balanced budget there a little while ago, and I have to ask you, my understanding is you've actually introduced a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. What kind of chance does that have?
Well, look, nothing has any chance unless you try. Rome wasn't built in a day, and sometimes you have to move things ahead a step at a time. But I will say this. It takes 67 votes for the Senate to propose a constitutional amendment. That's two-thirds vote in each house. And in the Senate, that means 67 votes. In the last Congress, we had 67 votes for a balanced budget amendment. It's just that you didn't have all 67 on the same balanced budget amendment proposal.
Yeah.
47 votes, all Republicans, supported the Hatch-Lee balanced budget amendment proposal, which I'm an original co-sponsor. And then you had 20 Democrats who supported the Udall amendment. And
can you explain what the Udall amendment was? What was that Udall amendment?
Balanced budget amendment. Yeah, it was just a different variation of the balanced budget amendment. It required a balanced budget, but the exceptions and the carve-outs were a little bit broader. And so my point is that you could conceivably come up with a proposal under the right circumstances through compromise that would allow us to pass out a balanced budget amendment and submit it to the states for ratification.
Finally, I'd like to ask you, this was your first experience as a sitting U.S. Senator to watch an inaugural celebration, inaugural speech, and your leader, Mitch McConnell, said yesterday that, well, the era of big liberalism is back. That was his response. Do you agree with that? Is that your impression of the speech?
Oh, absolutely. Look, this is a president who touted repeatedly very progressive, very big government proposals in his inaugural address. I was a little bit surprised in part because he started out with such a politically ecumenical, unifying message, going back to our founding era, quoting the Declaration of Independence and using language found in the Constitution. Yeah. And then he left that safe ground and he went on to some very liberal, very big government ideas.
Well, and you were on the platform just a few feet from where the president took the oath of office, no doubt. And did you know at the time that Beyonce was lip-syncing? These are the burning questions of our day.
No, I didn't. It looked to me like she was really putting her heart into it. So, I've got to give her points for lip-syncing. If that was lip-syncing, she did a darn good job.
She did it very well, yeah.
You know what? Maybe there was a second singer on the grassy knoll. All right, Senator Mike Lee,
Sure.
thanks so much for joining us. Good luck today, and have a good session.